today on Everyday Injustice, we have David Gaspar. He is the CEO of the Bail Project. And, it's really interesting. It was about 2013, 2014, I was listening to the late, great Jeff Adachi speaking in San Francisco. And he did this big thing on bail reform, and I had never heard of the issue up until that point. I wouldn't call myself an expert on it, but I've done a lot of work on it. We cover bail hearings all the time now in courts, and I think a lot of people don't understand just how unjust the bail system is, how it disproportionately punishes low-income people, marginalized communities. And the amazing thing is that it really doesn't offer a lot of protection, because at the end of the day, if you're poor, you're going to stay in custody waiting your trial, and you're more likely to, plead out and do all sorts of things. And there's all these adverse impacts from it. But if you're wealthy, you can plop down your money and you're no more safe for the community. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Anyway, welcome to the show. And maybe you can start by just introducing to those who aren't that familiar why bail is such an important issue.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me today. It is an honor to be here. Just to kind of start, just introducing people to who the Bail Project is in general. So the Bail Project is a national nonprofit. We provide free bail assistance and support to people who can't afford to pay on their own. And once someone is released, we offer court reminders and transportation assistance. That right there is the core of our direct service. It is why we exist. But when needed and where available, we will also help connect people to local services that also support longer term needs. So that's the Bail Project in a nutshell. To your question, people often assume that if someone ends up in jail, it has to mean that they're dangerous or that they did something really serious. But the reality is far more complex than that, and it's much more human. Many people come into contact with law enforcement not because they're an actual threat, but because they're struggling with mental health crisis, substance misuse, untreated trauma, poverty. All of these often show up in ways that get criminalized. And then we see people are arrested for simply surviving, sleeping in public, driving with a suspended license, missing court for lack of childcare, or even potentially transportation. But it still isn't because they pose an actual danger or threat. And beneath that are even deeper issues. People navigating a system that responds to instability with handcuffs instead of help. That is just something that they're faced, or forced to face. And it's not a choice. Understanding this is why it's key, or understanding this is key to understanding why bail reform in and of itself matters. Because when someone is jailed pre-trial, what they often need isn't punishment. It's actually support, stability, and a meaningful chance to make or create a better path forward.
And let's talk a little bit about how you got here personally. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I've lived multiple lives in the short period of time that I've been on this planet. Long story short, at 22 years old, I found myself arrested for the very first time as an adult. And I was in a system that I didn't understand with an eighth grade education, no comprehension for what was happening around me. I'm standing in a courtroom, don't know what's being said, don't understand what the actual implications are for my life at that point. But I just knew I had no choice but to trust those who were my stewards in ushering me through the process. And so I took my, counsel's judgment that I should accept a plea bargain. And what that did to my life was really change the trajectory of who I was in that moment, as well as who I would become sitting before you today. So prior to being incarcerated, prior to accepting that plea bargain, at 5 years old, I was removed from my mother. She got me back. 7 years old, I was in a coma for 2 weeks from a drug overdose. Then at 7.5, I was shot for the very first time, and so on and so forth. I can just continue going on. And up until that point, when I turned 22 years old, and I found myself in that moment facing that decision to accept a plea bargain. And what I tell people is that who was incarcerated on that day was not the person that you see today, because that person up to that point never really had that support that I spoke of, that stability that I spoke of, having a meaningful chance for success. Those things didn't exist for me up until that moment. Now, when I accepted that plea bargain, I had no idea, no understanding that I was actually agreeing to be illegally sentenced. So I ended up going to prison. I earned my GED, some college education. I went into law library. I taught myself law. I wrote my own appeal pro se, went to the state Supreme Court twice, and won my freedom after 10 years because of that wrongful sentencing. And when I came home, I just had a fire inside of me that I didn't want anybody else to go through that. I didn't want anybody else to be sitting in that moment of despair, feeling like there was no options or no choices in front of them. And what I learned later on is that I was in an environment that was rich with resources that if I would have been home, they could have helped me better understand my situation. They could have helped me understand that the decision that I was being asked to make in that moment was, in fact, not a legal decision that I was capable of even making. And so, for me, that's what brought me to the Bail Project. I'm proud to be here. I like to jokingly sometimes, compare myself to the Bosley Hair Club for men. I'm not just the CEO. I'm also a member, so to speak. But I really know what it feels like to be behind those bars. I know what that despair feels like, and I know that a lot of us will convince ourselves that I would never accept that. I would never take a plea bargain for something that I didn't do or allow myself to be sentenced to something that I didn't deserve. But when you're sitting behind those bars, your perspective on life is completely different. And sometimes you really don't feel like you have any choice but to say yes.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important points is that bail is really a leverage on people that and I always talk to my students that are going into the court for the first time, and I tell them, they ask, well, why is $25,000 bail unjust? And I'll ask you this question in a minute. But, part of it is that for most people in this situation, even though 25,000 can be reduced down to 2,500 and sometimes even a little less, most people don't have that money, and they don't have family that can have that money, and so they're sitting in custody. And then what happens if you're in custody? Well, if you have a job, you're probably going to lose your job unless your employer's really, really understanding. And most people in that situation don't have employers that are like that. If they have housing, they're going to lose their housing. If they have a spouse, they could lose their spouse or their family or their children. I mean, we can go down this list. And so what's the easiest path? Well, it's to do what you did, right? It's to plead out because you want to get out of there as soon as possible. And that's not necessarily in your long-term best interest. So maybe you can talk to this point too.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate the lead into this. And you're absolutely correct. Every day, people are sitting in jail simply because they don't have the money to get out. I'm a father of five. Thankfully, all my kids are grown. My oldest is going to be 36 this year. My youngest are 26. And I share with people that I still get phone calls from my children at the ages that they are saying, "Hey, I just got this new job. Can you help me get my work boots? Can you help me get my gear because I'm going to be working outside? I need a rain jacket. I need this. I need," and it is just an example of how we just assume that people are positioned to be able to take on these changes in their life. And so that was a positive example. But now imagine if my son were in jail. If he can't even afford work boots and a rain jacket, how is he going to afford a $500 bail, let alone a $25,000 bail? And we pretend that, oh, this must be relational to people's potential to get out. But in reality, it is far from that. It is very far from that. And I live in Indianapolis, and I can tell you right now, during the wintertime, our shelters are overwhelmed. But our homeless, our houseless population is still in need of shelter. It gets -7 outside, and then with the wind chills, -17. So these are individuals that have to make a life or death choice. Do I loiter, trespass, or burglarize in order to stay warm enough to make it through the night? But we've made that a criminal offense. And I understand where people are coming from saying, hey, there may, they should have made better decisions. But I like to use the example of somebody having a heart attack. If you're having a heart attack today, would you want me to call an ambulance to take you to the hospital, or would you want me to call an officer to take you to jail? And we end up making that call every single day. And it is unthinkable that a police officer should take somebody having a heart attack to jail. But yet we've normalized jailing tens of thousands of people every day who are in mental health crisis, battling substance addiction, both of which are classified as medical conditions. But we choose not to treat them with the same level of urgency, the same level of compassion. And they don't, we pretend like they don't even deserve medical care whatsoever because they chose to put themselves in that situation, even though the person having a heart attack may have chose to have that double bacon cheeseburger with the extra cheese, or may have chose to, like we know that there's choices in all of this, but we can't punish somebody for where they are in that moment. What we need to do is help them. That person that had a heart attack, let's help them get on a proper diet. Let's help them get some exercise. Let's help them have the support that they need to get in better health. We need to be taking that same approach with individuals in mental health crisis, those in houseless situations, as well as those battling substance addiction. To your greater point, I believe, being in jail for 3 days is essentially you no longer having a job. You being in jail for a week could mean you can't make your car payment. It could mean you lost your custody of your children. Being in there for 2 weeks means you can't pay your rent anymore. So your life is becoming destabilized with each and every hour and day that you spend inside of a county jail. And that destabilization does not go away just because somebody now has opened the door and said you can go free. That destabilization will last sometimes months in best case scenarios and years upon years in the worst of scenarios.
Yeah, and I think people need to think about these things because they don't. And one of the biggest problems that we see on an everyday basis in the criminal legal system is that we make it impossible for people to get back on their feet. So, it's one thing to say, hey, look, this guy made a mistake. He did something really bad. And maybe he did. I'm not going to excuse that. But at the same time, what does he need to go forward? Because at some point, most of these people are going to get out and they're going to go back into society. And if we strip them of their housing, their jobs, their benefits, whatever they're surviving on, that makes it really hard for them to get out and then be able to survive and not commit a new crime.
Absolutely. Um, you asked about my story earlier, and I'm one of those people. I committed an offense that, yes, I will say for myself very specifically, I deserve some type of punishment. But it doesn't negate the fact that I also needed even more so support, stability, a path forward that actually allowed me a meaningful opportunity to be as successful as I've become today. And I try to share that with people because yes, there is this one aspect of we don't want to excuse certain behaviors. We also don't want to turn a blind eye to what is actually going to be a real solution that carries all of us forward. At the Bail Project, we step in so that people can come home. We help them make their court dates. But most importantly, we want to support them in being able to move forward with their lives. Because this isn't just about bail, it's about fairness, it's about trust, it's about giving people a real chance. And I think, to your point of most people don't understand, the impacts of bail itself. The one number that I don't know how anybody can sleep with is it actually cost us $14 billion a year to continue keeping legally innocent people in jail. And that's ridiculous. Like, I don't know how that's a justification. We say that there's no money for treatment, yet we come up with $14 billion each and every year just to put somebody in a cell. that we know is causing greater harm to their lives and is deteriorating, their chances each and every day of being able to make it in a successful manner. And so for me, I just want to make sure that people are learning this, but they're learning it in a very real way, that this is something relatable to them. I know people have children. I know people have family members that are struggling with mental health disorders. I know that people have moments in their lives where they are caring for people that can't care for themselves, even if it's outside of the legal system. But that should just give us a fundamental understanding of how fragile our human lives are from time to time. When I lose my job, I need to lean on somebody. I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills. If I lost my car, I need a ride somewhere. I don't know how I'm going to get to and from. And so we have to start looking at this as being a human problem, a humanitarian crisis in some cases, and something that has real practical solutions that we can address without having to continue to punish people's struggles and actually orient our resources and our attention towards those things that have been proven to work.
And I just want to bring one more thing in, and then I really do want to get to some of the work that you guys are doing. But in most communities, the biggest mental health facility is their county jail.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big problem.
Yep. Absolutely.
And so what bail means is that you're putting people, a lot of whom have mental illness, they have substance use disorder, they're not in a good place, and you're putting them in a place where they don't have the resources, they don't have the expertise, they don't have the programming. I mean, it's, as much as prisons are a problem for this, jails are even worse,
Yeah.
because they're not set up for long-term use.
Absolutely. There was a really good book that I read called Any Place But Here. And it was written by a sheriff out of, I believe, Black Hawk, Iowa. And he was talking about the mental health crisis that his jail was facing. And in his book, he stated that I believe 68% of his jail population were all individuals that had some type of mental health condition and were in some form or shape of mental health crisis. And his argument is that they belong anywhere but inside my jail. He was like, my staff is ill prepared and untrained for mental health care, first and foremost. He said, then we don't have the funding for it. Then he said, all myself and my staff see are people sitting in these cells with their mental condition deteriorating hour after hour, because it is unimaginable to take somebody in mental health crisis and just lock them literally in a cage, put them surrounded by nothing but concrete and steel, and expect them to get better and expect them to heal. And then he said, and inevitably, because they were arrested on a low-level offense, we're going to re-release them back into the community. Not better. They're not healthier. They're not in a state to where that release is going to allow them any meaningful opportunity to get back on their feet. And he said, then my officers are called back out to the scene. My officers are called back to rearrest this individual for no fault of their own, because it's how the system works. And when we just think about how broken that is, and we think about how if we would have took that person once again to a hospital, to a clinic, gave them real medical attention, got them back on their medication, helped that person find some stability in housing, we would have changed not just the trajectory of that individual's life, but also any potential harm that they could have ever caused in the community going forward because of that mental deterioration. All that starts to get curbed, and we can start to see actual meaningful safety in our communities as well.
And that's a good segue to another question I was going to ask, which is, some of the work that we do have looked at the roles of sheriffs and prosecutors. And it's great that the sheriff understands the problem, but on the whole, I would say sheriffs are part of the problem here. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, I would say at the Bell Project, we operate in partnership with the sheriffs and the jurisdictions that we are helping to bring people home. So I do want to, start with, yes, there are some really good people out there that really understand the problem and see the sense of meaningful solutions and want to be part of that. But to your point, yes, I would say that there's a large population of sheriffs, police unions, and police officers that feel greatly different about this. And when you want to try to unpack that, if I start the conversation with mental health and asking them, what do you do? How do you handle this? There's a lot of frustration from all three of those parties. They're like, this is ridiculous. We should not be the ones getting called to handle this. I don't know what the hell to do. Like in some cases, they just literally are that blunt. I don't know what to do with these people. I wish somebody else would just take care of it. They don't even want it. But yet, when we start to talk about what would it take to redirect funding in order to create that alternative that you said you don't want to own, now we're talking about, well, hold on. You're one of those defund police people. We don't like and that's not even an ask. The ask is if this is a problem that you're admitting you are ill prepared or shouldn't in any way be involved with, then allow the funding to go where it's going to have the greatest impact. And what that does for you is it means now you don't have to be called to the scene. Your hours don't have to be billed. You don't have to do the paperwork. You don't have to do the housing. You don't have to do this. So why would you still deserve that money at the end of the day if you're not doing what that money was going to currently? Right? And so there's a conversation in there that we have to get away from counting dollars and cents. And we have to start being willing to put the money where it's going to be most impactful, where it's going to actually give us safety in our communities, where safety is not just a consideration of those on the outs, but those who actually are in need of services. And then let's have meaningful conversations about what does that process look like to ensure that law enforcement isn't still being asked to do something that they are not capable of doing in the best of ways in the first place.
So I have somewhere around 60 interns, most of them in the state of California, and they go into court. And a lot of what we do is actually cover bail hearings and things like that because they're quick and easy and it highlights a clear injustice. And what we see is that the DA, the prosecutor, charges these cases. Then they ask for them to be held on bail most of the time. And the public defender, and most of the time it's a public defender, will ask for a release, either on own recognizance or SOR, supervised own recognizance. And they go back and forth. And in California, and we haven't really gotten into this. There was a few years ago the Humphrey decision, which said that people should not be held in custody just because they can't pay. But I can tell you, watching this every single day, that every single judge in this state pretty much violates Humphrey because it doesn't take much for them to put a bail that is a de facto hold. And so with all that, I mean,
Mhm.
the system doesn't work. Even with reforms, even with an acknowledgement that bail is fundamentally unfair by the state Supreme Court, every single day we're seeing violations of this. We're seeing that it doesn't take anything for somebody to be held in custody, and a lot of these people are homeless. So, oh, they're not showing up. Oh, do you think that might be because they don't have a home and they don't have transportation? I mean, I'll get off my soapbox here, but I see this on the front line every single day.
Yes, we do as well. I chuckled when you said quick and fast, about a bail hearing. And I do that literally just to like hide the pain in my heart and deep in my gut. Because once again, I've been there. I've walked into a courtroom without ever even talking to my, public defender. And as I get up to the podium, I'm called up and I'm standing at the podium, whispers to me really quickly, do you have a job? Wait, his first question is your name David Gaspar? And he mispronounced it. He said David Gaspar, but he's like, and I'm like, yes. He's like, do you got a job? And I'm like, yes. Do you have, and he just literally asked me like 4 or 5 quick, fast questions. Judge talks, prosecutor asked for, a bail, which ended up getting set at $400,000, mind you. Nobody was harmed in anything that I did. I didn't push anybody down. I didn't smack anybody. I didn't shoot anybody. But I had a $400,000 bail at the end of the day. And all that public defender did in that moment is say, Judge, we would like to ask that you consider release. He has a job. He has 2 kids. He has this. And that meant nothing in the bigger scheme of that. And my bail hearing, I can't tell you I didn't clock it, but it really felt like it was under 2 minutes. And I just couldn't like even fathom the fact that my freedom isn't even worth a conversation. And so part of what we advocate for is, one, let's start redirecting the people with the mental health, with the substance misuse to the treatment centers that they deserve in the first place. What that does is it clears out potentially up to 50% of any jail's population. As I said, the Black Hawk sheriff said that, he had a 68%, jail population for mental health. If we start to clear that out, now all those arguments of it's going to take too much time, we don't have the resources, we don't know. Now you can actually start to spend the time in the courtroom and having a real hearing about that individual's potential for freedom. And now we can go on record and say, no, these are the facts of why we believe this person would be a threat to either this person or to the community. And the defense has an opportunity to say their part. And the judge can make a recommendation or a decision on record that then can be tracked and followed and reevaluated. And, but we don't do that. We don't even allow for that. And it's because we intentionally are overwhelming our system with people that do not belong there in the first place. I would just really love to point out at this time, like, when implemented well, reforms have led to lower pretrial populations. Like, this is a solution that works. And it does so without increases to crime, also refuting any of the fear-based opposition to change. And places that have done it, you've already named, California, but we have New Jersey, Washington, D.C., Houston, New York, Illinois. All of these places have seen no increase in rates of rearrest, no increase in new criminal activity, and no increase in defendants individuals that are responsible for returning to court missing court dates. And so we see success here. We know that this works, but it takes care. It takes attention to what is necessary and how can we do that in the best of ways.
And what you're describing is what I call assembly line justice, right? You come in, you get assigned an attorney, they set bail, and if you're in custody, you go back, get transported back to the jail, and then you come in 2 weeks and meet for 5 seconds, and then I mean it really is unbelievable, and
Yeah.
people, until people actually see it, they don't believe it.
Mhm.
So I really do want to get to what you guys do. So what is your role in this? How do you help people that are caught up in this mess? Because it's a mess.
Yes. As I kind of introduced the Bell Project in the opening, we get referrals from all over the place. And when I say all over the place, public defenders' offices, family, friends, communities, churches. We even get referrals from those sheriffs and their staff because they see that there's a need there. And so once we get a referral, the next step for us is connecting with that individual, actually having a conversation and learning about where they are. What are their needs? What do they already have? A lot of people, and I want to use the word surprisingly, but it is surprising to most of the community that is outside of the scope of how bail works. They're surprised to hear, what, they got a house, they got a car, they got a job, like these are stable people already. It's like, yeah, but even stable people don't have the means in a lot of cases to be able to secure their freedom if they're taken into custody for a DUI. Could be a first offense, but now they got a bail that's $5,000 and they only have $400 in their bank account. There's no way that they're going to be able to get out. And so we are sitting down talking to these individuals. We're learning more about their situation, what they have available to them. And then we're making an assessment based off of what their needs are. We're not doing a risk assessment of, is this person going to reoffend? Because there's a strong belief that individuals want to do better, and our numbers have proven that to be the case. And so out of 38,000 people that we've been able to support over 37 jurisdictions, we have a 92% court appearance rate. And we have even, more surprising statistics that allow us to be able to look at what methods are working and which ones aren't. How do we know that we're being effective in this? Because we're actually staying in contact with people, because we're actually following them along the full duration of their case. And we know how these cases are turning out for them in the end of the day, and then how they're being supported throughout that entire process. So we know what that looks like for us. And what we've been able to prove time and time again is that money is not an actual determining factor for somebody returning back to court. Money is not a determining factor for how someone is actually going to be able to move forward in life until you make them put or force their family unit to put that money up on their behalf. And now you've put them even deeper in a hole. And we've been able to see that as well. Those who actually are paying bails on their own, or their families are coming up with the money on their own, that is putting the entire family unit deeper in a hole. When grandma has to kick in, when the aunts and uncles and other people are giving their money over to secure that person's freedom because they know and they believe in them. At the end of the day, what we're doing is harming that entire family unit, weakening them, and positioning all of them to be even more fragile in their economic status as well.
So let's talk about reimagining pretrial justice. What would that look like to you?
Absolutely. I kind of named it earlier, but it's having a meaningful process in court. One where both sides can be heard, the prosecutor and the defense. The judge can actually state on record why they're making the decisions that they are. Where we're moving away from the scripted bail, settings, where somebody comes in, it's like, oh, you have a theft, here's $100,000 bail. Like getting away from those bail schedules. This is supposed to be about justice, it's supposed to be about fairness, and it's supposed to be about equality. And if we can't walk into a setting to where arguments are being heard and documented on record, if a judge can't be willing to make a decision on record why they leaned one way or the other, then we can never get to that point of having that fairness and that justice and that equality across all. So for us, it is really about how do we improve that process? How do we ensure that due process is being met? How do we make sure that individuals are getting in front of a judge, getting in front of the court in the times that they are constitutionally, protected to have? And so for us, that is the goal. But like I said, we have to unpack that because we know that there's root causes for engagement with law enforcement. Yes, there's over policing in some cases. Yes, there's profiling in some cases. But ultimately, what we know overwhelmingly is that the people who are being arrested, more often than not, are struggling with some type of medical condition, some type of poverty, some type of houselessness. And if we can start to meet those needs in a more meaningful way, then we can start to free up our legal system to do its job in the best of ways possible. And I would say the cart doesn't have to come before the horse, and the horse doesn't have to pull the cart. We see this in states like zero bail in California, Illinois having their pretrial fairness. Like we know that these things work simultaneously. We know that we can get to a better place without having to put one before the other. So we can have greater accountability in our justice system for everyone involved, not just for the person with the facing accusation, but for the prosecutor, for the judge, for the defense. And we also know that if we bring people home and we support them, and we help them with their reminders, with their transportation, in some cases when needed and where possible, connecting them to those local services that will help them stabilize and be able to move forward. That is the justice system that I believe all of us deserve, because it is the one that is going to move us out of the cyclical nature of incarceration and move us towards actually having solution-based or solution-oriented solutions that allow us to move our entire community forward in a safe and fair way.
So we like to humanize some of these stories because I really believe that most people have never even thought about these issues, that they're scared of the very notion of somebody committing a crime and somebody getting released who committed a crime. You're kind of your own story, but I was wondering if there's a particular story that kind of highlights the urgency, but also the possibility of change.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one that's close to my heart. It's a bailout that I did myself. Um, but just a quick note, for anybody listening, please go to the Bail Project's website, bailproject.org. We have tons of client stories on there. We're always trying to bring that element into the conversation because we want people to see people as human beings, and see them as potential of who they can become in the future as well. But the story that comes to my mind, I won't name him, but I had a client that his wife left him literally for his best friend, sent him spiraling. He didn't do anything to harm anybody, but he started using drugs and he just became a hermit in his house. His water got cut off, his electricity got cut off. He owned his home though. Like this was his house. He wasn't loitering, wasn't trespassing, but because it was wintertime and he had lost his utilities, he started a fire in a little barbecue grill. And the neighbors called the police or 911 because they thought there was a fire in the house. And so the police got there. They believed he was loitering. They didn't believe him when he said it was his house. They took him into custody and charged him with possession of paraphernalia and drugs, as well as loitering and what have you. In the process of that, he sat in jail from, I think almost 30 days straight, and he lost his job. And so when he came home, he was no longer employed. His house was in arrears, didn't have any, utilities, didn't have anywhere safe to go. And so we helped him get connected in partnership with the public defender's office, where they had social workers, and we were able to get him his clothing. We were able to get him a bicycle so he could have transportation, help him get, back into employment. This individual contacted me a year after the fact. And he said, that was one of the worst moments of my life. It was like having lost my wife, having lost my best friend, having gone through what I did with that moment of addiction. He was like, that was bad. He was like, but I had never been to jail before. And that experience in jail still gives me nightmares. He said that experience in jail still it just robbed me of all of my humanity. But when I came home and you guys wrapped your arms around me, when you guys literally put clothes on my back, you literally, helped me get my first groceries, when you helped me make those things happen, it was like you reminded me that I deserve better. And he said that reminder changed me. He was like, I will never go back to that dark place again. He was like, I don't deserve that. I deserve better. And he said, and I also deserve better people in my life. And that story for me just is one of those human stories. Like we forget what brings people into that moment of contact with law enforcement. His story didn't begin in the news cycle at the moment his wife left him for his best friend and he just started a spiral. His story became when he was this loitering trespasser who's, trying to burn down a house. Like that was his narrative that he walked in front of a courtroom with. And we forget that all too often. And yet he still came home. He still got employed. He still got on his feet. He still is doing good. And for some reason, we also forget that human potential doesn't get erased simply because we had a bad or interaction with the criminal court system. We have to remember that people are resilient. People do want better for themselves. People do want to live in a better way. And they just sometimes need the help and the support to be able to make that happen.
Now, I know you already mentioned it, but I'm going to ask you to bring it up again. How can people find out more about the Bail Project?
Yes, please, bailproject.org is our website, is the best place to go. But we are also on social media if anybody wants to follow us. But I would definitely ask people to go to the website.
Well, we've been talking about bail and the Bail Project with David Gaspar. He is the CEO of the Bail Project. He has lived this and now he works this and he's giving back. I think he is the perfect ambassador for why we shouldn't throw people away just because they make a mistake. This has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.